Hi, my name is Derek, and welcome to my channel, A Man in a Sea of Lies. I know it's quite dramatic. So, this is about the Canadian media, as promised, and uh, this is totally unscripted. I didn't prepare. I did prepare a little bit in my head, of course, but no notes, no bullet points, nothing like that. Everything straight from the heart. So, when I came here in 1982, the landscape of Canadian media was quite different. There were still many viable publications, papers, TV stations, news outlets, whatever you want to call them. They were considered quite conservative at the time, right? Like in television, uh, like Global News, CTV. These were, considered sort of conservative back then. Uh, as far as newspapers, The Sun was thriving back then. They had many great writers like Labor Zink and George Jonas and Christy Blatchford, just to give a few examples. And it was, as far as political commentary, it was quality stuff. It was always put down as this sort of a tabloid publication. Uh, you know, even Global Mail was considered conservative paper back then, right? So it was quite different. Talk radio, at least here in Toronto, was mostly conservative, except the CBC. But things evolved over the years, and the whole political spectrum, as far as media, has shifted to the center first, and then to the left. You can't call the Global Mail now a conservative publication. Toronto Star has always done the same thing. The Sun is almost non-existent now. Uh, in television, there's nothing. There is some talk radio stuff still, but these people, they, for example, I used to listen all the time to CFRB 1010, and they had Bill Carroll and guys like that, and then later Jerry Yeager. And Jerry Yeager, you know, is considered a conservative. But then I started listening early in the morning in anticipation of Jerry Yeager's morning show, and John Moore became the morning host on 1010. And then later, he's a good guy. He's very knowledgeable, and the interviews he does are great. And then Donald Trump came along, and I would turn the radio on in the morning, and sooner or later he start talking about Trump or mention Trump in some context or another. And then I would listen and listen and listen. I said, well, let's just listen to him until he mentions Donald Trump. So that's what I did for a while, and it varied from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, but sooner or later, in some context to another context, he'd mention Donald Trump. And this is the kind of obsession that Canadian media has or have. They find themselves a target, and then bashing that target is paramount. They don't pay attention to much else, and this is what we're seeing now as well. Back in the day when Rob Ford was mayor of Toronto, it was the same kind of thing, right? Everybody got on the bandwagon of bashing Rob Ford. Anybody from Now Magazine to the CBC. And for a kind of a sober observer that I aspire to be, it just becomes tiresome after a while, right? Because nothing else matters except slamming this other guy for over and over and over again. Any kind of political situation or political conversation would start on some subject, and then eventually you'd go, but Donald Trump, but Rob Ford. So I got tired of it eventually. So anyway, to get back to the subject, the whole political spectrum shifted to the left with the Canadian media, and it's now to the point that they all sound the same. They're all singing from the same songbook. Like it doesn't matter which TV station you turn on and what the news is. You can easily predict what they are going to say, on any given subject. And the way they frame the commentary or frame the questions, it's, they always have to find an angle that would bring in the boogeyman into the conversation, right? For example, I listened to the snippets of CBC commentary on the Davos situation that just happened with Mike Carney and Donald Trump. And the CBC guy, some host of some program, I don't know his name, I'm sorry. He had a sort of like a conservative. He invited some sort of a conservative guy to have a conversation with him, and at some point he framed his thought in a way that, how can you negotiate with a guy, meaning Donald Trump? How can you negotiate with a guy who wants to grab 90% of Danish territory, right? So this is the kind of thing, like 90% of Danish territory, like they were going to invade, the U.S. Army was going to invade, or Marines invade Denmark. It's ridiculous, right? But this is the kind of thing they do. They frame the debate in such a way to bring up their favorite things that they're obsessed with. So now, after all these years, to me, it became unsustainable. I can't, in good faith, listen to that kind of stuff. I find it tiring and boring, quite frankly. And I don't know where we're going with this, because all the conservative stuff, the sort of balanced stuff is vanishing. Like Toronto Sun is almost non-existent now. There are some branches that, like Ezra Levant or something. These people are completely marginalized, right? Nobody pays any attention to them at all. But more to the point is that these news media outlets in Canada behave that way for a reason, because it resonates with Canadians. So the bottom line is, this is what Canadians really want to hear. That's what they want to hear. They want to frame the debate in such a way so they can continue to hate Donald Trump and the Americans. And they're oblivious to the fact, for example, now with the negotiations with the Americans and in the Davos situation, they're oblivious to the fact that Donald Trump is eventually going to go away. And our relationship with the United States of America, the greatest relationship of any two nations that the world has ever known, I think, is just going to continue. But because we so set on knee-jerk reactions and emotional things when it comes to political commentary, we continue to respond and embrace this kind of rhetoric. There's another aspect to it, and this is not going to go over very well, I don't think. When you're looking at Canadian media now and the commentary, and when you look at the talking heads on television or newspaper articles, or even online stuff. Most of the political commentary analysis are done by women, and why the hell not? They seem to study more and be more committed to their jobs. There's nothing wrong with that. But back in the day, I remember when most of the talking heads and most of the anchors on television were middle-aged or older men. And the feminists used to blast media organizations for that kind of thing, right? It was unacceptable, how, just men, men, and men, and men. Now we have women, 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 and women, and it's fine. So this kind of double standard is what strikes me as going into the wrong direction. These kinds of conversations are pretty much impossible these days, like on a public forum. You can't bring certain stuff up. This is what I'm talking about when it comes to, a man swimming in a sea of lies. But conveniently, when it fits the left, they bring gender issues, to the forefront all the time. One of my favorite movies is As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt. I mean, it's a crazy story, right? Like, he's a total jerk, misogynist, whatever you want to call him. He exploits women by his storytelling, and it's not great. Helen Hunt's character, on the other hand, what a wonderful woman she is. She's fighting for the survival of her family. She's fighting for her son, and she works so hard. He's a spoiled brat, privileged man, and this sort of thing. But as unlikely as the relationship develops, it does develop. And at the end of the day, he becomes a total suck because of the strength of her character, right? So what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't frame our political debates along gender lines. We shouldn't frame our political debates along hating Donald Trump or Rob Ford or anything like that. We should really step back and have a more sober approach to political debate. But unfortunately, it doesn't resonate. The news media they always been the same. If it bleeds, it leads. So controversy, conflict is what they thrive on, right? It's up to us to distinguish what's going on from the bubble that whatever is bubble is presented to us. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is that we should really, really, really take everything with a grain of salt. And one of the worst things that I see people do is pick their favorite sources for information or political commentary and stick to them, and just sort of frame the conversation in their heads the same way. You can't do that. You just can't. There are signals. If you're careful about how you listen to political commentary or social commentary or any commentary at all, there are signals there. If you carefully listen, you can pick that the conversation is slanted a little bit in a certain direction. So I guess what I'm trying to say is gather your information from as many sources as you can possibly can. You know, this thing about gathering information, what I find fascinating. I'm going to get back into this thing later on in some future videos. But what I find really fascinating is back in the day when I was a kid, you really had to be educated in order to find out about historical or political facts, right? Like my father had a 12-tom encyclopedia at home, so you can always look that up. But now we have information at our fingertips. And yet I find myself in conversations with friends and people, and you come to a grinding halt because some facts are not like we don't know what we're talking about at a certain point. Like something comes up that we don't know about, and it's as easy as Googling this shit, right? But nobody does it. People continue to behave in a way that information is not available to them, even though it's widely available. I know Google has changed and all the other crap, so you have to be more careful with the way you do searches and stuff like that. But still, nevertheless, like a simple historical facts, who was that guy? Who was that girl back in the day? Put it in Wikipedia and everything is right there. But people don't do it. It's right there. It's clicks away, and we still don't do it. So to wrap it up, Canadian media is irrelevant. It's irrelevant to me. But I still think that it's relevant to most Canadians. And I find it to be a sorry state of affairs. And that sort of resonates with Canadians. And then we have people like Scheer and other conservative politicians that they just can't find a way to resonate with Canadians because they're not honest. I wish some conservative politician would find a way to be honest. Maybe, not saying Donald Trump way honest, but some way to be honest with Canadians. But I've been waiting for over 40 years for this. It just doesn't happen. So I'm very pessimistic. I wish Canadians would find a way to, sort of embrace a different view of the world. That's what's sold to them by our media. And I mentioned this before. I blame the people and the media at the same time. This sort of like a interaction, which I hate. I don't know where it comes from. I used to think that we Canadians are sort of set in our DNA is sort of in a loyalist way to the Queen and stuff like that. So Canadians really do trust their politicians. And it worked for a while, but now I think it came to a point where it doesn't work. And you have to question everything, absolutely everything that comes your way. There's just no other way. Now, Canadians have been trying to find a way, Preston Manning and people like that. It goes on for a while, but then it kind of disappears. So I'm not hopeful. I'm not optimistic. And now with this crap with the United States of America, I don't know where it's gonna lead us. Like, we're losing the sight of a horizon, sort of thing. We're so focused on certain things that we don't know where we're going anymore. So that's my sorry take on Canadian media. Thanks for watching.